So I'm happy to introduce Brett. He is the Assistant Director in the Office of Economic Development, Entrepreneurship, and Industry Partnerships here at UAlbany. He previously served on the faculty at RPI, where he led the Life Sciences Entrepreneurship Initiative and helped launch 20 life sciences startups in collaboration with regional institutions and Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. At RPI, he also developed the Life Sciences MBA program and supported ventures, navigating regulatory investment and intellectual property challenges. He also established the undergraduate and MBA entrepreneurship programs at Utica and co-founded the Media Innovation Collaborative at Quinnipiac University. He is also the founder of 7 Point Labs, focused on human-centered commercialization of intellectual property. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett.
Fantastic. Great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Nancy, thanks for the great introduction. I've been here at UAlbany now for about a year and a half. And for those of you who have gone through the RISE program or popped down the Innovation Center, you've realized that we are doing quite a bit here with our small team that's hopefully going to be growing in 2026. So it's another way of saying, let's make 2026 the best year ever coming out of our Innovation Center and let us know how we can support you as well. Another thing with cap tables, this topic has come up quite often, so we decided to do these lunch and learns with the first step. We also decided to take a step back because we realized that this is an area that needs a lot of attention, especially when we bridge the research side to the investment side. So for today, very introductory, but we're also going to take a step back and focus on the human side of value and cap tables. So let's get into it. As with everything business related, always like to throw an agenda out there. I'm going to move everybody down here. Quick introduction. We're going to talk about dividing equity and the great promotion that Nancy and Juliana put out on various social media channels. It got into what we're going to cover. Debt equity, which is very, very, very prevalent in research and academia. We're going to talk about that. Investor perspective, we field a lot of questions here about what are investors looking for, especially with academic or university spinouts. So I'm going to touch on that. The employee pool. This is often overlooked when discussing cap tables and what does an employee pool look like. But there's also some strategies built around an employee pool, which is extremely important as you get going. We're going to talk about cap tables at UAlbany and why they're now required, especially if you're going to exercise an express or an exclusive license. And then we're going to give a little exercise to close. For those of you who have worked with me before, I like giving gifts. And some of you have been the recipient of some of my gifts where we created simple tables and I included all the formulas and some of the chat bots in there from the AI side to get you where you need to be. So I am more than happy to share those resources with you. So let's get into it. All right. Quick story, as Nancy mentioned in her intro. And by the way, I'm going to go back. I come back to that photo. I grow a great winter beard. Whenever that photo does pop up, that's the one you'll find on the UAlbany website. That is me. I grow a winter beard that has now more blonde in it this year than last year. So before you message me on the side and said that does not look like you, it very much is me. So thanks for working with me on that. This is my 4th university, and I always get this. And this is something that was I think presented to me with my first startup. I've been a part of 3 startups. 2 have been successful. 1 has failed, and we could talk about that offline as well. And I always start with this question that was asked of me: how much of your startup do you own? And often I get 100%. That will never be an answer, especially when you are looking for funding outside of the university space. You have to start delineating the difference between grants and investment. Grants are not investment. They're great for the research side and for some small business. New York State has some fantastic programs, but in order to move ahead with your startup on the business side, it'll never be 100%. And I get that often, and we get into a spirited discussion. And sometimes researchers say, nope, everything is mine. And that is going to be a tough sell, speaking with investors or other co-founders. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to do some of the simple math, but it's important to start doing that math. My brother, who's out in Palo Alto on the IP side, they ask this question differently than saying, how much of your business do you own? They always say, what's 100% of zero? And for those of you that are doing math or who have worked with me in the past, I ask this question often. The answer is zero. In order to get something, you're going to have to give something up. That is if you're a single founder. Today, what I want you to do is conceptualize your startup or what you plan to be your startup going forward with multiple founders. And this is what we're having, Kelly and I, this conversation often is that we're now asking founders working with our incubator or the Rise program, have you had the conversation? And we often get the pushback and say, what conversation do you mean? You say, you have your cap table. Which percentage of your startup or your eventual startup do you own? And that's a conversation that has now become a tough conversation because what it comes down to is this. How do I value my value to a startup? Because how do others value my value? It's a very, very, very fine line. So in your mind, nothing is ever going to be a 50-50 split. You have to assess the value to the company, not what's done in the past, but what's going forward, because the someone else on the other side, your co-founder, is doing that exercise because someone is valuing your value as well. All right. With that, business just became very personal and very human. You often hear the refrain, "Oh, it's just business, don't take it personally." That's often said by people that have never been on the other side of dividing a cap table where they have to assign a number to the value or really to the potential of their startup. So as I was preparing for this, and these are some of the discussions I've been having, and this has happened to me two times about having that tough conversation outside of my current position, it becomes a very personal endeavor, but it gets easier. And it gets easier to have that conversation if you have that number in your head with support before you enter that conversation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you get to that number? We are going to put you through this exercise in the next 10 minutes and over the next half hour about how are you going to divide equity. Before your startup, and we get this a lot here too, it often includes the activity in the lab, perhaps some startup exploration. We ask this question, hey, 2 a.m. idea, we have a startup. Well, it's not a startup until you actually file those documents with the Secretary of State of New York or whichever state, Delaware, et cetera, you may be filing. Or maybe you did some prompt engineering, AI, I plugged it into ChatGPT, I hear often, Googling. Great. You still have not had that conversation with your co-founders. Or maybe you thought, hey, we're just going to divide everything 50-50. In some cases, we've referred to as lifestyle companies. That could be the case with high value propositions, especially coming out of research and academia. It's not going to be 50-50. All right. So right now it's just ideas. If you establish a cap table, you now have a clear sense of direction, you have a clear purpose, and most of all, you have a clear sense of expectations. What is expected of you and your value? What's expected of your co-founders? A cap table is going to do just that. Remember, a lot of this is going to be from the human side. How are you going to push this forward? So assess your value and contribution because someone will assess your value and contribution as well. So what we divided up here, and this is the number that you're always going to keep in mind, 100%. A cap table will never be less than 100% holistically. It'll never be more than 100% holistically. If you're doing the math and you find yourself at 98.75, somewhere something went wrong. If you're at 107.5, something went wrong. I distill it down this way simply because I don't want you to overthink it. All of you can do the math. Starting out at 100% is the best way to go, and we're going to work our way down. Okay. This is another thing that comes up often. Assess all contributions going forward as the startup, not what's contributed in the past before a company. So we've had a lot of researchers come to us and say, well, their name's on the patent. and we push back gently and we say, what are they going to do to push the company forward? And they say, well, it doesn't matter because there's eight of us on the patent. Well, how many of those names on the patent are actually going to be contributing to the business side? If the answer is two, those two people should be on the cap table. All right. The other six should not. All right. So again, this goes back to hard conversations. What are they going to contribute going forward? Because any investment group or investor is going to ask, this person's on your cap table. What are they contributing? So these are hard conversations to have, but they're needed. All right. So everything going forward, think about it that way. How many founders? This comes up often. It's okay still to just be one founder, but you have other people that are going to help you out. Maybe it's somebody that's going to be your chief technology officer. Maybe it's somebody that's developing your AI platform. Maybe it's someone in your lab that is vital to pushing forward that next enzyme. All right. If they are going to be contributing in some capacity to the business, that's okay. But on most cap tables, you're going to see one, two, three, four co-founders. Four is definitely at the high level. So starting from zero, you are likely going to be somewhere in the two or three range. And what I've done is I've broken down a couple examples for either one, two, three, or four, and I'm going to explain as we wrap up today that I have some resources that can help you. But for today's example, we're going to create a cap table for how many primary founders that you have, and we're going to use the number two. So it's going to be Nancy and Juliana are co-founders, primary co-founders. All right. So there's two of them. All right. They're the ones that started it. They're the ones that are going to be driving the business. They are primary founders. So let's get to it. Let's put a number on this. Assessing your value. So right here, what we found are the 8 variables that you should consider as you're assessing your value. Okay. Full-time commitment, key role, relevant experience, IP tech contribution. That's a big one going forward. Risk assume, that's money. Network fundraising, money. And these last two, which are going to have a smaller value, and I'm going to put the percentage breakdown on this. These last two are somewhat, I would refer them as a question mark variable about operational execution because it's somewhat intangible. It's really tough to define that going forward. And then the future value contribution at 5%. So we've weighted those with a smaller number. So there's a couple different ways that you can divide it, but just for this example, remember you have 2 founders, 8 variables, all weighted differently. All right. So let's get to it. Also, 100% of the pie, remember. So I just want to reference that. I'm a blueberry pecan guy. If you want to plug in your favorite type of pie into the chat, go for it, and we'll make note of that and send you gifts during the year. So just remember, if you speak highly of me and want to give me a gift, it's a blueberry or pecan, and we'll go from there. I see a lot of you are writing it down, so thank you. All right. So these are also percentages. All right. So I'm going to go through it. So the full-time commitment, I'm going to go slow here. These are the variables you should keep in mind. All right. So 20% of the entire 100% of the pie, these are the variables to consider as you move this forward. If you are giving up your full-time job, if you are a researcher and say, yeah, I'm done with this. This seemed fun. I want to devote all my attention to the startup. Give yourself 100% of 20%, right? So that means you're going to be at 20%. If you are part-time, that's 10 hours or more with defined milestones, I would put that at 50%. If you are on a patent, fantastic, and you are making the case you think to be part of a cap table, but you're not active in the business, give yourself 0%. Simply because you are not going to be contributing to the success or moving the business forward. All right. That 50 could vary a little bit, 10 plus hours a week. Think about what you can devote to that. Right now, I'm helping 2 startups. I'm devoting roughly about 8 to 10 hours of my life on the weekend or outside of business hours to this. So I'm easily assigning my value to the full-time commitment or that part-time commitment to this. Okay, here we go. Key roles and responsibilities, we're at 15%. All right. If you're bringing on a CEO or a CTO, I'm using this as somewhat of an evergreen example, knowing that some of you are in the life sciences, some of you, I know cybersecurity, some of you in AI. So try to be flexible. There's no hard and fast rule. So if you're bringing on a CEO with day-to-day leadership of a core area or to drive that full business forward, and they want to be a founder or a co-founder, the high bound should be 15%. It shouldn't be more than 15%. If there's lead functional owner, product sales data with significant scope, maybe assess that at 70% of 15%. Supporting role or limited scope, 40%, so that's around 6% overall, or advisory only. If some of you attended Doug Banal's presentation last month already, about the difference between advisor and board of directors, if they're coming on an advisory role before you start up, I would not give them any equity. If they're board of directors, which means they'll likely have some type of investment involved, you should assign a percentage on that. But if they're coming on just as an advisor, strong recommendations, do not put them on your cap table. Relevant experience. This is another one as well. Prior startup success in this domain or 10 years of relevant leadership. We get this a lot where we bring somebody in and they say, oh, someone's going to be joining our team there on the cap table. They were part of a startup. Oh, well, please explain the startup to us. And they start explaining the startup, and we then say, oh, what was the name of their startup? I don't know. Did they have an exit? I don't know. So then we go to the Crunchbase database, which our office has access to, and we plug in their name, and we see that they're not in the database. Crunchbase is, if any type of deal flow or deal was made on the business side, it would be in the Crunchbase database. That's updated every night at 11:59 Eastern. So if there was a deal that was conducted yesterday, it would be in the Crunchbase database today. All right. So always vet people that are coming in on that and saying, oh, I was part of a startup. If you had a successful exit and there was money exchanging hands, you may want to consider that. Solid domain expertise or prior startup roles. Remember, this is the business side, not the research side. So this comes up a lot to say, well, we have research expertise in this. Well, are you going to give them that much on the cap table? Think about how are you going to move it forward in terms of business. Some related experience, maybe you were part of a startup that is still going, you had to exit. Just ask those tough questions about what's your experience and what have you provided. So again, that would be around 40% of 15%, so that'd give you about 6%. If you've never been part of a startup, assign yourself 0. It's okay if you're assigning 0 to some of this. IP tech contribution, this comes up often. And this is where I strongly recommend delineating what was on the patent, but what is also going to be produced going forward. Great if your name is on a patent, but are you iterating on the next version? You have a V1, you have a V2 out. Have you built a functioning MVP that works that you could demo for an investor group? If so, and you are a major contributor on that, give yourself 15%. If you're contributing to the IP product or architecture, 70%, meaningful contributor, early artifacts or research. I know some of you are working in larger labs, especially in the life sciences side, which is great, but also ask yourself, what is a meaningful contributor? So there's a lot of gray area here. All right. I'm going to move over just in the interest of time. Risk assume investment. This one also varies a little bit, but remember on the business side, if there's an investor that comes in and says, I want to be considered a co-founder before any money exchanges hands, if they are putting up a contribution that does not involve the tech, does not involve the science or the engineering, but they are providing something that you don't have, and that's money, it's okay for them to be on the cap table. And these are just, again, somewhat subjective, 10% of annual income. I believe FICA and other federal agencies put accredited investors as overall worth of $1 million for 2 consecutive years, or salary for 2 consecutive years for more than 220,000. So always ask yourself, how much are they putting in, and are they an accredited investor? If so, they may be on your cap table for 10%. Moderate cash, 5 to 25K. Small cash, you get the idea. No at-risk contribution. That's a zero. This is another thing, fundraising. There are people on cap tables that have a network that they could bring that network to raise money. That's something that you don't have to do. I would consider putting them on at 10% if their primary goal is to raise fund for that first check. And when I say that first check, a lot of you are in high value propositions. So you're probably looking at 250K or more to get to where you need to be. Some of you right now, I know between SBIRs or winning some demo days are somewhere between 25K and 100K, and up to 250K with an SBIR. Remember, for some of that, that is not their next level check. We're looking at those next level checks. What can those people bring on your cap table? Operation execution, this one, again, in this time, I'm going to move this along. Do they have a track record to move your business? Can they get you customers? Can they get you letters of intent? Can they deliver the actual product? Do they have supply chain experience? I know some of you are in microelectronics as well, and that one comes up quite a bit. Advanced manufacturing is very specialized. So if there's somebody that comes to you and says, I have this experience and they have a track record of delivery, you may want to give them about 10%. If they have some evidence, 70% limited but growth capability, you get the idea, or no demonstrated execution, but you need someone to move product, give yourself somewhere between 0 and 40. And finally, future value. This one is super difficult to assess. It's subjective. Are they a contributor? Right now, we're working with a startup where so they have a good marketing team behind them, and they're on their cap table. They can offer some future value because they're going to get them potential customers, potential sales, or potential investors. They offer some value moving forward. So even them being on for 5% is not a bad idea. This question comes up for future value. How long is too long? I would recommend assessing their value within a year or two. If they say, hey, they're going to produce in about 5 years, that's too long. So ask yourself, what's the future value? Okay. So add it up. What's your value now? What's the number? Remember, this is based holistically on 100%, but it's a good number to assess your value for this exercise. I'm going to stop here for questions before we go into some of the others. We're going to come back to that number in about 10 minutes, but I want to make sure that was a clear exercise. If you had any questions and you need me to clarify, please let me know. So probably not 100% total yet for these two hypothetical founders. Correct. All right. You'll never get there. I'm going to come back, Camille. I'll come back to that number as well.
Um, but
Because
we
we're
had
going to
a,
have the employee pool. So hold on to that number. Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
um, I think Rick had his hand up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry you're off screen, Rick. How are you?
Yeah, I just came on video. Hi. I was just going to ask. I think a lot of people look at the cap table and those sort of initial funds as a way of getting sort of free help that you're not paying cash for. So if you're not going to put people on the cap table, what are the other ways that you can sort of compensate or to provide for future compensation instead of the cap table?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we go over the employee pool, I want you to cut me off and
Right.
say, because I think that's a great question because you right now you have no money, right? Right now, what are you offering? Are there other ways to get people or leave people off the cap table, but still incentivize it somehow? Is that what you're asking? Or the other way around? So
Exactly, yeah. Because I think it's sort of a kind of a rookie mistake when people just give away 5% to all 10 people who say they're going to help out, and then seven of them don't, and yet you've given away a chunk of your company at a very critical stage.
yeah, huge point on that. And it doesn't always have to be that. There's also some ways for vesting. And I'm going to get to that with the employee pool. If you have perspective on that, would love it. I'd love for this to be interactive if you do have that perspective. So fantastic. Um, all right. So you have that number, actual versus perceived. Let's get into some of the other items here. So some red flags. Let's talk. Did I miss a question too, Nancy or Juliana? I just want to make sure we get to that. About 70%. All right, Patricia, we're gonna see where that needle moves a little bit. We appreciate the number on that. Okay. This concept of debt equity is coming up often, and I do realize that some of you are joining us outside the academic space and you're in the Innovate 518 community. So debt equity still exists. So I'm going to actually point out what exists on the academic research side and really what exists all around. So debt equity, you saw some of the classic definitions that were some in some of our promos. Checked out our LinkedIn or Instagram pages as well. Shameless plug for the Innovation Center and the promos there. But debt equity, anything company stock owned by individuals who are no longer actively contributing to the company's success or growth. Rick, you just heard Rick mention, there's people that contribute all the time for a month and they're like, this isn't for me. Sounds cool, but we're out. But guess what? We're still on your cap table. So what are you going to do about it? So that's considered dead equity, which is somewhat, if not a big red flag, or small red flag, is a big red flag. The equity is vital. It's currency. It's the active contributors, talent, and secure investment. And for investors seeing dead equity, and they're going to go down your cap table, each line, and say, what does she do? What do they do? What does he do? And if the answer is, yeah, they were on the patent, that's not going to move the needle. That's probably going to spike your deal really fast. All right. So some things to look for. Again, going back to the human side, if you're looking at that cap table and you realize that nobody's doing the work to move your business forward, there is that sense of resentment. And again, if someone says, "Yeah, I don't resent you, but I'm on your cap table," again, think about it. They may not have had that experience, and it becomes very human. It dilutes decision-making power. Just remember, you're on a cap table doesn't mean you have voting rights in some capacity. It also reduces the amount out there for talent attraction. So when we go to the employee pool, that's going to be a big item there. And also dilutes active founders. So I saw Patricia had 70%. Let's say you had somebody on your cap table that's not contributing anymore for 2%. That very well could have been yours at 72, right? So think about how that's going to impact the active founders that are pushing this ahead. Causes, departing founder, an active investor. And this is a big one. I'm not sure if you're seeing this. Okay, I'm just going to move my bar down. This happens all the time. Again, I'm at my fourth university, my second R1, and we get this where it's a little bit, you could include the word here about what I'm about to describe. But if you are a PI in a lab and you say, well, I'm your PI in the lab, I should be on the cap table, that may spike your deal as well. Because simply because you're a PI of a lab doesn't mean you should be on the cap table of a business moving forward. So when an investor sees that and goes down the line and says, please explain what this person does, and you say, that's our PI. PI, I've seen it in other situations where they hold it over a postdoc's head, which is awful. But I'm just being real with you on this. There's certain situations where because we're trying to bridge the divide between the research and the startup side, that PI is saying, well, I'm your PI. I should be on the cap table. If they're not contributing to moving the business forward, you heard me say it, they should not be on your cap table. Some solutions, and Rick, you mentioned this, and let me know if you have some perspective on this. Vesting schedules, buybacks, or founder selection. I'm going to go round robin on this real quick. Founder selection actually helps to have that conversation to say, hey, Nancy, I'm going to use Nancy as an example because she's front and center. Nancy's going to contribute ABC, but we're not sure if Nancy's the right person for the job. Let's move Nancy to a vesting schedule in some capacity. Or conversely, Nancy is a strong contributor. Nancy's going to bring a lot. We're going to put Nancy on the cap table for 2%. All right. So founder selections help. Buyback clauses in anything contractual are also helpful. Look, life happens. Let's say that you're on someone's cap table and there's a death in the family, your lifestyle changes, you get a better offer. Life happens. In that case, if you're on a cap table and you're contractually obligated to sell your shares back or move them back, it happens. Sometimes the founders are saying, look, it's a really tough life situation. You were on the cap table for 6%. Come back to us in 6 months, but we're going to have to reduce it to 2%. It happens. So buybacks are really strong options as well. And then vesting schedules. I like vesting schedules because that means you are producing work. So often in tech companies, you'll hear something called a 4+1 or 4 years and a cliff. And what that means is that you can get up to a certain equity stake every year that you're vested. So if you're doing the work for 1 year, you get 2%. If you're contractually obligated to that and get to 2 years, you're at 4% until you're fully vested. So vesting schedules do work. It basically ratchets up your contribution. Rick, did I hit on one of the items that you were trying to refer to if you're not on a cap table or there's different options to get you
Yeah,
up?
perfect. I think just highlighting that it's more work to be done up front, but like across our portfolio, I would say 25% of the companies have had issues from early stage cap tables come back and bite them.
Mhm.
Whether it's co-founders who are no longer friends and just hate each other's guts and do
Yeah.
toxic things and things of that nature really do happen. So.
Yeah. No, fantastic. I think Rick, what that highlights too, thanks for the contribution. It's life happens. So those conversations up front are fantastic. At the end of the day, the result, debt equity makes your business uninvestable. So consider that. All right, moving ahead. What are they looking for? And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the questions that come up to us often, especially as it relates to cap tables. Founder management and equity. The 50% rule works really well. So what does that mean? If you multiple co-founders are on there and they should be more than 50% of the 100%. Doesn't mean, I saw some big numbers in there. Doesn't mean it has to be there, but it has to be more than 50% because to an investor, they're going to say, okay, these founders are committed to moving this forward. So that threshold is really important. Even if it's 50.1%, that means if the business wins, they win, they're still invested to move it ahead. There is that strong commitment. And there's even founder vesting schedules. Even though I mentioned employee vesting schedule, if you're on for 1 year, it's 2%. As an example, if you're on for 2 years, 4%. And we can work with you to really look at that, and we have the documentation for vesting schedules as well. Um, University, Ashwari, question. Yeah.
You mentioned that every year, if you are contributing more, you might get 2%, right? But
Mhm.
from where this 2% gonna come? Because rest of the founder might not be interested to dissolve their equity. And if we are initially we are setting it up to 100%, then every amount of equity is already invested.
Yeah. So that's where the employee pool and the outside pool come into effect. So the next section, when we talk about what that pool looks like, there are ways to build that vesting schedule within your employee pool.
Mhm.
So it could be the initial 2%, but where's that other money coming from, or that other percentage coming from? That was your question, correct?
Yeah.
So consider that, and that's why, and this is also taken from the perspective of common shares or common equity and not preferred, and we'll get to that in a later lunch and learn. But we're going to come back to that, Ashwari, when we factor in that employee pool, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
University IP ownership, reasonable stake. IP is not on your cap table. This comes up often to say, well, the university owns XYZ. That's part of your licensing. So anytime a university is on there, it's usually with a safe or some type of investment, not the IP. So we get that question a lot. So that should not be on the cap table, but any type of investment vehicle, if you're a public-private university that has an investment fund, they very well are going to be on your cap table, most likely as a simple agreement for future equity. Employee incentive, Ashwari mentioned it, and I mentioned it as well. Healthy option pool. So go back. This is where we go back to that original number, and I just want to move it along. We're almost at 12:45. Is an employee pool should be somewhere around 10 and 20%. So go back to that holistic number of 100%. Now you're going to have to reduce that share, what you thought. I would recommend just for this exercise, if it's 70%, I would then multiply that by 0.20 or however you're doing the math to reduce that 70% equity down a little lower, because you are going to now incorporate an employee pool or some type of other pool. I've seen it referred to as an option pool. It's a side pool that gives you some wiggle room, and it's actually favored by investors because it also aligns with a hiring plan. So we're going to jump right now into employee incentives, or what that option pool looks like. Set it at 20% of that 100%. Okay. Structure and governance is something else that investors look at. Cleanliness of the cap table. Is there a balance of power? Is there a structure to your cap table? How many people are in your cap table? So always keep that in mind, and our office is happy to look at and work with you on cap tables. All right, the pool, why it's needed. Because you have no money. All right, I think this goes back to Rick. I know I referenced you twice, but I thought, what you offered was fantastic. You don't have much to offer. Remember, this is setting up the cap table and having that conversation before you get into any type of money or any type of business formation, right? You have nothing to offer right now. So with an employee pool, and I'm just going to use it as a pool right now, that gives you some wiggle room to build out your team, to offer some more incentives, to create a vesting schedule. There's a lot that you can use with a 20%, I would say, wiggle room on your cap table. So right now the pool is needed because you don't have any money. So right here, here's another one, some sliding scales. I'm going to go over this really quickly. And again, the video is going to be made available. I love this simply because this is a hypothetical startup that has cash, but also some equity as well. So let's say you're bringing on somebody, let's say you get $1 million investment and you're going to hire a CEO for 200,000, but you're also going to give that CEO an equity option. So you're going to give them 0.85%. That's 0.85% of 1% that's coming out of that 20% pool. All right. This may be another way to look at this, because you said you're going to be hiring or you're bringing on a CEO. Let's say you're offering them a salary and equity, which sweetens the deal a little bit. This sliding scale is really fantastic, I think, because this equity is coming out of the pool, but it's also incentivizing them to do the work in addition to the salary. So at the high bound here, if you're paying them 200,000 for a CEO as an example, and they're asking for a lot of equity, you may want to counter with less than 1%. And this is hypothetical, simply because where is that equity coming from? Going back to Ashwari's question. So think about it. There's a balance there. On the low bound, let's say that somebody's willing to come on. They're maybe not willing to give up their full-time job yet, and they're what's referred to as a fractional CEO. You may be able to pay them 35,000 for the year, but also give them, I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off down here of my screen, 4.15. If you could see this, let's just use this example, the 40,000 salary, but you're also giving them 4.05% of equity. That overall value is 400, almost 405,000. Right. So there's different ways to frame it and to give it, just not to put them on the cap table or salary. There's ways to meet them in the middle. If you have a little bit of funding, right, and you want to hire them, if they're coming in on the business side of the operation, and let's say you could pay them 15,000, but you're also giving them equity, there are ways to balance that out. All right. Hiring plan, it also shrinks the size of the option pool. So let's say you bring people on at 0.5%, at 1%. And we're going to give you what Y Combinator gives, I think, as a really good a litmus test of what you potentially can give in equity on the cap table. There are different ways to frame this, especially when you're negotiating on the investment side. If you're looking to bring on a developer, if you're bringing on a chief chemist, you get the idea. An investor wants to know why they're on the cap table. That shrinks the employee pool because you're bringing somebody on, but at a smaller percentage. You can say that covers us for the next 12 to 18 months. That should cover us till next financing. Just don't say it's standard. Always have a reason why you're giving away equity, even if you're justifying it to your new employee or partner, or you're justifying it to the investor. This comes up as well long. Maybe this goes back to your question as well. And Ashwari, I'll come back to your question. Is the common share allotment, and I'm sorry, I should put the resource here. This is coming from Y Combinator, which is always considered the gold standard in accelerators. How much of the common shares of equity should I give if we're bringing on a new CEO? So here, and again, long maybe as a negotiation point, coming out of that 20% of the equity or employee pool, you should probably give them somewhere between 5 and 10%. If they're a chief operating officer, if they're overseeing the day-to-day, 2 to 5, again, you can go down the line here. This one on the tech side, if you're working in AI, actually helps you build out a team. And I think this goes back to Rick's point about too much equity or if you can't give them much. Let's say that you're trying to bring on 3 AI developers or a UI UX developer, and you're bringing on a team of 5. So right there, if you're bringing on 5 developers, and let's say they're junior engineers, you give them 0.2%. Right there, if you're bringing on 5 developers, you're only giving up 1% of the equity, the employee pool to hire a team of 5. So think about there's different ways to cut this. And if you're doing, let's say, a 4+1 vesting schedule, and I think Ashwari, this answers your question. Let's say you're bringing somebody on for 2%. You would say, okay, we want you for the next 4 years to do the work, and we could pay you this over the next 4 years. But as long as you stay with us for 4 years, we're going to give you 2% equity the next year, 2% until you're fully vested. And that's going to come out of the pool. So hopefully, Ashwari, that answers your question. Where is the money or the equity coming from? Yeah. Give me a thumbs up. Hopefully that gets you there. All right. And again, these are just last rules, some tactics. Before you discuss a hiring plan with your investor, just say, look, this employee pool right now, we have 20%, and we're going to use about half of it to hire people. Talk about the hiring plan before you start talking about any type of valuation or any type of investment. All right. Because that signals to them is that it's just not pushed over here in an employee pool just to give away. It's to say you're going to be doing something with it to build out the team. All right. Real quick, I know because we're running close on time here. UAlbany, if you're coming through UAlbany, this applies to you. If you are going to assign an exclusive license or an express license, that's going to allow you to explore the commercialization of your university conceived IP. You are now required to produce a clean cap table for consideration before licensing. And the reason why we're doing this is to ensure that you do not have dead equity on your cap table. All right. We are seeing deals being conducted right now, and I love this. I may be in the minority on this, but there's a lot of investment firms right now that have a clause in their deal structure that says, we reserve, before we give you any investment, we reserve the right to reorganize your cap table. I love that because they're basically telling you there's dead equity on your cap table. It's giving you a little bit of a do-over to say, look, somebody's coming in at 20% here, 20% there. We are not giving you money unless you reorganize your cap table. I love that because maybe that deal or that tough conversation that you had to start wasn't as fruitful as you would like, and that value was not assigned correctly, they will tell you what you're valued at. So a lot of investment firms are now doing that, and I'm a big fan of it. So that's going to be in your exclusive license or your enterprise, exclusive or express. Okay. Check transfer office cap tables. Thank you, Nancy. Absolutely. Okay. Pre-money versus investment. I'm going to go over this real quick. We're going to go a couple minutes over, so I apologize. I like giving gifts. If you went through Rise, you've seen this. I'm more than happy to provide resources. Just reach out. I'm the only Orzechowski at UAlbany, and I'm going to give you my email address later on. But I do have sliding scales to show how you can just plug in numbers for your basic cap table. Long mentioned earlier, you want to use that methodology. Again, hat tip to Kelly. She's developed it. We have that resource, so just reach out long after so you can plug in those numbers. It gives you such leverage when you're having that conversation. Again, it minimizes the tension. So right here, your basic cap table, you have 3 founders, you have an employee pool, and remember, this is pre-money. So I've divided this up pre-money and post-money. You have not taken on any investment, but you can see that's 100% of the pie. All right. Founder 1 has 50%, which is 5 million shares. Founder 2, 20%. Founder 3, 10%. Right. There's no investor share here whatsoever. All right. The value is less than a penny because right here, this cell, what is your company valued at? I've seen some crazy valuations for some companies that don't even have a prototype. All right. Now, the way that the investment world works and where the environment is right now, you're going to need a prototype. You're going to need a patent. You're going to need sales depending on your company. That's how I got the less than one cent. Everything in this scale right here is based around 10 million shares, and that's the common practice. So here, and this is a quick way to show you that post money, you're going to see that your shares, right, are going to be diluted, but they're going to be worth more. So if you took on investment, and let's say that your investor shares, right, are taken out of this, or taken out of the 20% for employee as well, it's going to be minimized. Your shares, if you're a founder 1, it's going to be a little north of 41%, but you can see that that cap table has moved a little bit. An investor gives you $1 million, your cap table is going to move, but your shares are going to be worth more. So you started out before the money at $50,000. You've taken on $1 million of investment. Your valuation is now more than $1 million. You've taken on an investor, so your cap table has moved. And real quick, I just want to highlight this. Everything is going to be based on the percentages. Going back to what we talked about at the top of the hour, if you exceed more than 100%, right, your cap table, your percentages are off and it's going to move. And in this example and the scales that we give you, there's some great resources online as well. These numbers, if you change, let's say that you have a prototype, you have 3 patents, you have a little bit of sales, and it's right around $500,000. This should be proportionate. So if you have $500,000 in $500,000 in valuation, this number, the investor number, should exceed that. If you're asking for less money, chances are your cap table isn't going to be as strong. All right. Just as rules right here, and then I'll wrap up. I know we're going to go 5 minutes over, so thanks for sticking with us. Any investor is going to look to get about a 15% ownership stake. The higher you go in terms of seed rounds, it's probably going to be closer to 20, 30. That's going to be off your cap table. If you're going through an accelerator, I know most accelerators regionally here are going to ask for 5%, which is a safe note, simple agreement for equity. I've seen other accelerators asking for 10. And then there's friends and family round, which we'll get to in the second version of our cap table, lunch and learn, which I definitely think we need another one. If you're working with VCs, they're going to be 10 to 20%, because remember, they have something you don't, and that's money, right? Or angels or pre-seed will look to receive 5 to 10. Most university funds, and I think most startups that we work with here out of the incubator, are going to be around 5 to 10%, which doesn't sink your cap table. And that's why everything that we talked about beforehand here is to ensure that your cap table is right. Those conversations happened early and often to make sure that there's a little bit of room on the cap table to make sure that you get that next check. All right. And just as an example here, and I use this often, 2019 was a great year for IPOs, initial public offerings. Pinterest, Uber, Lyft, and they got these numbers because it's public now. If you were a founder of Pinterest, and you can see right here, I love this example because there's three founders, Evan, Paul, and Benjamin. You can see at the time of their IPO, they had 11%, 9%, and 2% equity on their cap tables for only 22%. They took on 4 rounds of funding, so their percentage on their cap table decreased, but you could see that the value of their shares, not a bad payday. So 11% when they finally had that exit was worth 981 million. So for IPO exit, the median 9% and the average was 11 in 2019, which was a huge year for IPOs. All right. So simple rule, percentage of the pie goes down after the investment, but your piece of the pie becomes much more tasty and valuable because you now have money. All right. So in close, items to consider, have a discussion with us. We can work on the cap tables. Shameless plug for Rise, which we go over this. That deadline is next week. But I'm going to open it up for questions.
Yeah, we typically invest sort of Series A and beyond. So the seed pre-stage cap tables look a little different than what I'm used to. But typically there's a line item for the pool to represent sort of how much is being carved out. Is that not typical at this earlier stage?
It is. So I think I went over it quickly, and I apologize, Rick, because now you're on. Come on, let's go here.
Yeah, when you were talking about the pool and stuff, it was there, but just in the last example, where you had the three founders or whatever, there was no pool piece alongside the investor as far.
Right here. So yes, so it stays right here. I went over it quickly, sorry. So the employee pool is still intact.
Okay. I just missed it. Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Every time I give this presentation, I go over it quickly, but that employee pool needs to remain intact. So you're working with Series A, right, Rick? And now I know who you like. Thanks for joining us today on that. So thanks, because I know I reached out. So awesome. And I'm happy to have that conversation. But most of what we're working on in the incubator are going to be pre-seed or seed. And you're right. Once you get to a Series A line item, and we have some different examples of that, that's going to look much different. But that employee pool, correct me if I'm wrong, is still going to be there.
Yeah, I think for us at the Series A stage, it's very common to have to do a refresh because at that point the pool has been used up, and then you'll put like another 10% or whatever allocation back into the pool.
Yeah. And I love that. I
Growth.
think if you could speak to that maybe real quick for our group here, that I think is going to be interested in that. I'm seeing more and more of those deals being structured where even before that first check is cut, they're going to be looking at that cap table and say, this is off. Nobody's doing work here. They're not doing work here. That restructuring now, I think, is becoming much more common on the pre-seed and seed level of reorganizing cap tables. Correct me if I'm wrong. What are you saying?
Yeah, I think the big problems we see are where there's rights associated with ownership, even in the common share, or you have all these wonky sort of names for each progression that came along. So one company needed to go ask like 50 individuals who would put in $25,000 checks for every board decision, things of that nature. So a lot of the cleanup is from a governance perspective, just to clean it up and make things simpler and more efficient going forward.
Yeah, like I said, we couldn't do this all in 1 hour, so I definitely think if can you and I have a conversation offline, I'd love to meet with you about this because understanding term sheets, understanding rights is something that now our research community is becoming a little more savvy in that, and I think that can go a long way in understanding why those conversations are needed up front.
Great. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Rick.
Brett, a question. Is there such a thing as too early to be thinking about your cap table?
No, I think it's more of, and this is what we're seeing, especially, within labs, right? If you're a part of a lab right now, whether in the life sciences or AI side, and you're working with a really dedicated team, and you do harbor some aspirations for businesses, and you're coming through Rise or other startup avenues here through our incubator or innovation center, you have that conversation up front. I know Kelly and I have sat in on a few conversations just to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. But assign your worth, assign your value. And I think that's why that rubric that we created, which isn't, a standard, it's just one example, allows you to start realizing what your value is to a startup. So as work is being conducted right now, and you do harbor those aspirations for a startup, really start thinking about it. Good question, Nancy.
Thanks.
Thank you, Blair.
Aishwarya has her hand up.
So basically, I have a question about this patent. So this is something like every time whenever in the future we can file new patents, and company valuation is also somewhere considered this patents. So if we file multiple patents in the future, will company valuation would change somewhere?
Yeah, most likely. I think this is one of those situations where, the patents will come first and then maybe investment comes in, right? And you're always iterating about the value. And as you're assessing, what your valuation is, and you're asking, okay, is this patent really improving, the current technology? Is it moving the business forward? That's where that could eventually become more valuable. I know coming out of academia, most are set, creating a patent fence. So you're iterating on the first patent, and if it's actually contributing to the business side and improving the technology of the product or service, the valuation will rise. Absolutely.
Mhm.
What that
Okay,
number
good
is,
to
I
know.
think
Thank you.
it just all depends, where you are on the investment side. Is it
Mhm.
contributing to sales? Is it contributing to more investment? And if so, there may be some investors that say, okay, that's contributing to some business activity. All right, Nancy, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
We will send out an email when the recording is available, along with those additional resources that Brett mentioned in the presentation. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Great. Thanks all.